What's up guys, my name is Sean with YJ Productions, and today I'm going to be comparing the Sony FX III to the Nikon Z6 III. I want to start off by saying both cameras are absolutely phenomenal, both do a great job at video. I just think that Nikon has not gotten enough respect lately, and the FX III is a bit overhyped. Obviously, the FX III is probably one of the best well-rounded video cameras. You just can't go wrong with it. It does everything very, very well. However, there are some applications where it just isn't as good as other cameras coming out in the past few years. The FX III is an older camera at this point. It's been out for quite a few years, and the newer cameras are catching up. First off, I want to talk about the FX III's strengths. First, it just has better extreme low light. A base ISO of 800 and then 12,800 is very, very useful. I can't complain. Even at its max ISOs, it handles noise fairly well. I think it's no stretch of the imagination to say that Sony has the best low light performance out of any other brand. However, that doesn't mean it's always the most useful. I've heard a number of Sony users complain that 12,800 is too high of a second base ISO. And while I think it's very useful if you're gonna actually go out and shoot in the dark, when you have any kind of light source, you almost need to throw ND on it to get proper exposure. Whereas the Nikon Z6 has a base ISO of 800, just like the FX III, but a second base of 6,400. And in fact, some users have said it's pretty clean and usable up to 10,000 ISO. So for one camera to kind of be stuck at 800 or 12,800, while the other kind of can meander anywhere from 800 to 10,000, I'm gonna pick that camera that just has more wiggle room to move around. Why? Because I always have lights on me. If you're gonna spend that much money on a camera, you should be spending money on lights. And if you're not doing that, that's just lazy filmmaking. Spend money on lights, that's how you make things look good. The camera isn't gonna do all the legwork. And if you're trying to make it do all the legwork, you're never gonna get super awesome shots. And I think the flexibility of the Nikon Z6 is a little better. However, if you really need low light, the FX III just is a better camera, hands down. It does better with underexposing, but in general, I don't think it's as good for my personal use. Now, something that is uncontested is the FX III's autofocus. It's top of the game. It's absolutely phenomenal. I don't think there's another camera out there that beats the FX III's autofocus. The Nikon autofocus has gotten very, very good lately. It's very good if you fine tune it. I will say that out of the box, Nikon autofocus is okay. It's fine. If you're on a wide angle lens, it looks just as fine, but the moment you tighten up to like an 85, it gets a little tricky and you have to just fine tune it, and that's fine, and it works great. I'd say it's comparable to Canon's, but the FX III just is better, it's smoother, it is faster. If you're gonna be shooting sports, the FX III is a better camera, I would say, but the Nikon isn't falling too far behind, although the FX III definitely has the edge there. Something the FX III has that the Nikon Z6 III doesn't is focus breathing compensation. Now, I have to say, this is a feature I'm pretty jealous of as a Red user, a Lumix user, a Nikon user, a Canon user. I have owned and used all of those other brands, and I am jealous of that focus breathing compensation. It's very nice to know that, ooh, if I don't want focus breathing, I don't have to have it. I do like focus breathing as a creative tool sometimes, not too much, just a little, but it's nice to know that you can control it. Disclaimer, that is only with their native E-mount lenses. Other brands will not support focus breathing compensation, or rather Sony won't let them support it. So if you're gonna be using cinema lenses, manual lenses, vintage lenses, or Sigma or Tamaran lenses, that focus breathing compensation will not exist, which does kind of suck. I understand why, but you don't have it with those. But if you're using native Sony lenses, you do have it, and that is a nice feature to have. Now, something else the FX III has that the Z6 III does not have is a fan. Now, I will say, the FX III does a great job of not overheating. However, it will overheat if you push it hard enough for long enough and you have a lot of stuff attached to it. That being said, the Z6 III does not have a fan. There aren't many reports of it overheating from what I understand. Even when you shoot at the highest quality codecs, at the highest resolution, it still takes a couple hours of straight recording in 90-degree weather for it to overheat, even though it doesn't have a fan. I would be a little more cautious about overheating that camera. It is black, so I would just be careful of it, but the FX III does have a fan, and that is a win in my book. Now, cameras are all in good, but what's really important is sound design. Audiio is a company that creates sound effects and has an immense 300,000 sound effect library, as well as music. Now, your video can be absolutely phenomenal, your shots can look great, but they won't be the best they possibly can be, and your viewers and your audience won't feel for it and understand it and see it the way you want it to be seen without good quality music and good quality sound. So go down to the description below and use the code I have down there to get 70% off of a year of their pro subscription. Trust me guys, it's absolutely worth it. As a sound designer full-time, yes, cameras are not all I do. It is incredibly useful to have as many sound effects at your fingertips as humanly possible, and quality ones at that. Back to the video. Now that we've gone over what are more of Sony's strengths, I want to talk about Nikon's strengths here. The Z6 III does have internal 6K in RAW and 6K ProRes RAW. Now, the FX 3 can shoot RAW externally to like the Atomos Ninja 5. Nobody really wants to work with that. You know, at that point, just get your stuff right in camera. That's more of like an emergency, like fix things kind of solution than it is true RAW. You don't get all the benefits of internal RAW. External RAW is different from internal RAW. That's a whole nother video topic. But the Z6 III does shoot internal RAW in 2 versions or 2 codecs of it, from 8-bit to 12-bit, and it's a compressed RAW. So if you remember that lawsuit between Red and Nikon, which Nikon won and then acquired Red, what a freaking power move. Now they have compressed RAW, which means you can kind of choose the quality of RAW and your file sizes. So honestly, with compressed RAW, sometimes you can get those file sizes down lower than you would with like a regular Sony codec. So when you hear people in the comments go, oh, but the file sizes are so much larger, they're as large as you want them to be. And I'll leave it at that. It also does shoot ProRes HQ in 12-bit as well. So if you don't want to be shooting RAW and you still want that high quality, you can shoot ProRes, which is very nice. Good for Nikon for implementing that stuff. Now, the Nikon Z6 III also has a 25 megapixel sensor. The reason I mention that is the FX 3 has 12. That means the Z6 III can shoot in 6K full frame, it can shoot in 4K full frame, and it can shoot in 4K Super 35, which means if you have Super 35 lenses, or you just want to punch in and get a little closer without changing your lens, or you're shooting sports or wildlife and you can't get closer, boom, you have that option. I do that all the time on my Red Dragon. I do it all the time on my Lumix S5. It's a dummy useful feature, and it's something that I personally won't go without. I absolutely love that feature. So I would say that that's a huge win for Nikon there. The Z6 III also shoots in all the same frame rates and resolutions as the FX 3. It shoots in 240 frames a second in 1080p. It shoots at 120 frames a second in 4K. It just does that. And there's no real argument that Sony's slow motion is better now. Nikon's caught up, and it's just no longer a slow-mo battle. Not that I even think you need that much slow motion. I think it's a little overkill most of the time. A lesser point, the Z6 III does have 8 stops of IBIS to the FX 3's 5.5. I think Sony's IBIS is a little bit better. I find that Nikon's is a little snappy. However, if you're just trying to pull off a tripod look, then the Z6 III has way better IBIS. It's gonna look so much better. It's gonna be so much steadier. Plus they have the sport mode, which really locks it on. So I will give the win of IBIS to Nikon. However, if you're trying to use it with a gimbal, then you might want to turn Nikon's IBIS settings down a little lower. I think the biggest thing the Z6 III has over the Sony FX 3 is the Red collaboration. First off is the lenses. Lenses and lighting will make your shot. Your camera will not make your shot look good. It's just better quality, better options. It's just trying to get to that film standard, which with RAW internal with the Z6 III gives you that. But with lenses, Nikon has options for any mirrorless brand to be adapted to the Z mount. You can put any lens of any brand onto the Z6. Not only that, you get vintage Nikon lenses. You get DSLR Nikon lenses, which are some of my favorite, and I'm shooting on one right now. Also, you get access to their Z mount lenses. So you get 3 generations of Nikon lenses plus every other brand. Lens options are all of it. You are not limited by anything. In addition to that, if you ever decide to move over to buying a Red Komodo or any other new Red camera that might come out, you will have access to the Z mount on that, which comes with a whole lot of features. I did a little video about that. CVP did one as well. I'd go check that out, because now putting Nikon lenses, including old DSLR Nikon lenses from like a decade ago, onto a Red Komodo gives you a whole host of features. And I think that's totally worth it. If you're looking to upgrade from a mirrorless camera you now might not want to look at a Sony Cinema camera or a Cine Alta camera. You might want to be looking at Red now because I think you have more options, especially with lenses here. Last little note, Nikon updates their firmware longer than almost any other brand. Nikon's known for taking care of their customers. They're kind of slow about it sometimes, but they do take care of their customers, and they update their firmware forever. So this camera was released in 2024, and it will probably receive firmware updates for, you know, the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. You can expect Nikon to really put their high quality firmware down into their cheaper cameras, which brings me to my last point, price. Now, a lot of people like to ignore price. They think, oh, the best is the best. But at the end of the day, if you spend less money on a camera, you can spend more money on lenses and more money on lights, and that will give you a better image. Forget the camera. If you can put more money towards lenses and lights, you are going to have a better image. You just will. That being said, the FX3 is $3,700, pretty hefty. The Z6 III is $2,200. That's a lot cheaper. That's a whole lot cheaper. You can buy quite a few lenses for that. Depending on what you buy, you could get a whole set of lenses for that. You could get a lot of lights for that price. You could get all the lights you need for that price potentially. So when considering FX3 or the Nikon Z6 III, I think the Z6 III wins hands down without a doubt. It is a better camera. I forgot to mention dynamic range earlier. FX3 has slightly better dynamic range, just from what I can see. I think it's pretty negligible, to be honest. Expose properly, light properly, you will be fine. They both have enough dynamic range. You're arguing like 0.1, 0.2 stops at this point. I think if you put the camera side by side in a realistic shooting scenario, you won't see a difference. They're the same. So I'm just giving this win over to Nikon. The Z6 III is a better camera for a better price. Even if you take the price out of the equation, it's still a better camera. I don't think there's an argument to be had. That being said, you still might want the FX3 for its ease of use and its autofocus. If that is something you need and you're not really a filmmaker and you're more a content creator, the FX3 might be your camera. If you need it as a B cam to an FX6 or an FX9, again, it might be your camera. Outside of those uses, I think the Z6 III wins. Thank you guys for watching so much, and until next time.